Good morning, or good afternoon, I should say, everyone. My name is Leah Phifer, and I am running for the DFL endorsement to represent Minnesota's 8th Congressional District. Today we are trying out another one of our Facebook Live Q&As, but on Sunday. So this is the Sunday edition of Live with Leah. I believe we'll have a few folks joining us. Looks like we've got 3 already. Nope, climbing up to 4. So glad to see people are out and ready to dive in on a Sunday. So we'll just give it a few more minutes as folks continue to join in here. And in the meantime, grab your coffee. I have mine. Got this wonderful mug when I was in Ely a couple weeks ago, joining the Tuesday group at Grand Ely Lodge to talk about some of their thoughts and ideas for the future of Minnesota's 8th District. So grab your coffee and you can type your questions into the comment bar on the side there. You can also email them at info@phiferforcongress.com. I put it up on the description section there. My partner, Jason Buck, will be getting any questions that I might miss in the live comment scrolling bar, and he'll be sending those to me. And as well, if I miss any questions during our 30-minute section, I will make sure to get back to you via email as well. So thank you so much for joining today. Like I said, my name is Leah Phifer, and I am running to represent the 8th District of Minnesota, seeking the DFL endorsement. Caucuses for the DFL are on February 6th, so coming up in just a couple of weeks, with our Congressional District Convention being on April 14th in Duluth. So now that we have a couple of important dates out there, I will just take a moment to introduce myself for anyone who's joining who hasn't already joined before. I am living in Isanti. That's where I'm currently at right now at my home here, but I grew up on the North Shore. I grew up in Two Harbors, Minnesota, come from 4 generations of men who worked in the Iron Range mining industry and 4 generations of women who ran their own businesses. My grandma started a restaurant known as the Vanilla Bean Now. She began it as Sherry's Kitchen in Two Harbors. My great-grandma ran Range Catering up in Virginia, if you've ever been there. And my dad worked at North Shore mining for 30 years, and my grandfather retired as president of EVTAC. I did not go into the mining industry or small business. I ended up going into federal law enforcement. I studied Spanish in college, and in 2008, I was offered a job with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I translated in a detention facility for undocumented immigrants right here in Minnesota. I spent 6 years working in Immigration Customs Enforcement here in Minnesota, and that really was 6 years of a front row seat to what happens when politicians use people's lives as political bargaining chips. That's something that we are seeing today as we are in day 2 of the government shutdown, which I am excited to talk more about and hear your thoughts about as we move forward. So after 6 years of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, I went back to school. I got my master's degree at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the U, and I accepted a job offer with the FBI, where I went on to work counterterrorism in the Minneapolis division. That was another example of federal policy that often misses the mark. Policy that is designed to keep us safe, but doesn't actually fulfill its obligation. My first big case working at the Minneapolis office were the 9 young men that traveled from Minneapolis to Syria, attempted to travel from Minneapolis to Syria to join ISIS. Those 9 young men were sentenced to a variety of duration in prison, up to 35 years for some of them. And when we're looking at putting frustrated, angry young men away for 35 years into a prison system that is not equipped to de-radicalize these young men, is not equipped to engage in rehabilitation for these young men, we are putting ourselves at an increased public safety risk. When they are released 30, 35 years from now, they will be even more angry and more frustrated than they were when they went in. So if you visit the website under the National Security section, you will see my plan for a 3-step program that works towards countering violent extremism by giving people, communities, the power to look at recognizing lone wolves, recognizing when people are going down the path of radicalization, rehabilitation, and prevention. Those are the 3 most important areas when we're talking about some of our greatest national security threats. So I jumped on my motorcycle after I left the FBI in late May, and I launched an 80-day motorcycle tour. Around the 8th and 80 days is what I called it. And what I heard from people on this 80-day listening tour was a lot of frustration, a lot of people feeling left out. And we heard a lot about angry, frustrated Trump voters during and after the 2016 election. But what I found were there are a lot of frustrated DFLers, people who are feeling left out, people that feel that we no longer stand for the strong progressive values that the DFL once stood for. So after my listening tour, I gave it a lot of thought. I visited with family and friends and mentors, and I decided that we need to do better, that we need to bring people back into this big, beautiful tent we call the DFL by doubling down on our progressive values, not compromising them. I believe that the DFL stands for 3 major values. Those values are economic justice, environmental protections, and human rights. And if we don't stand for those 3 things, what do we stand for? So I would like to see a DFL, and I would like to see candidates and elected officials who double down on those 3 values. And that is what I plan to do if I'm elected to Congress in November of this year. So I see we have a couple of questions that came through here. One was a question about my economic development plan. Thank you so much for asking that. So one of the greatest issues facing the 8th District right now is this idea that we have to make a decision between protecting our environment or building a strong economy. I believe that that is fundamentally a wrong choice. That is a false choice. We do not have to choose between those 2. We can protect our environment and build a strong economy. So what we did on my team was find the top 10, 12 issues that people talk to me constantly about this summer and how we could best address them. If you go to the website under our economic development plan page, you'll see we've rolled out the first 3 components. We're talking about our infrastructure. We have a lot of infrastructure issues going on throughout the 8th, which is not unsimilar from what is happening around the nation, and my plan for funding the repair of our roads and bridges. We're also talking about clean energy. Minnesota is dead last out of the 8th. Minnesota's 8th district is dead last out of the 8 congressional districts for the creation of clean energy jobs. And that is absolutely unacceptable. Minnesota's 8th district has ample natural resources, sun, wind, water, that we can be putting towards the creation of clean energy jobs. So there is no reason that we should be dead last out of the 8 congressional districts in Minnesota for the creation of these jobs. So I talk about how we can create more clean energy jobs. And we also talk about small business development, and that will be coming out next week. So we have a very robust and exciting economic development plan that also covers funding for rural broadband, which is this overarching component that is going to feed into the rest of our economic development plan. Because if we don't have strong rural broadband access across the state, across the country, we will never be able to fight for a 21st century economy that will make us globally competitive. So that is also up on the website. Because as you know, many of these things require money, require funding, and we need to make sure that we're making our candidates responsible for how we're going to fund a lot of these programs. So I look forward to hearing your feedback on the economic development plan, how we can address more issues. The economic development plan, like I said, addresses the top 10 or 12 issues I heard about. So there are lots of areas that I still want to hear from you about and how we can create plans and goals and metrics for that going forward. So I see lots of comments. Thank you. Barb Crow says clean energy. Yes. And I see a comment here from Nicole. I also have a few coming in on email, the phone here. So Nicole says, speaking of the economy, I'm frustrated at the progressive Democratic inability to articulate an economic case for universal health care. Thank you, Nicole. If you pay taxes, you are already paying for people who are not covered or undercovered for the lack of primary care visits. I completely agree that mental health, rural health care, and healthcare in general is one of the biggest issues that I heard about this summer. I would say environmental protections, healthcare were the top 2 issues I heard about this summer. So thank you, Nicole, for your question. I am a proponent of single-payer healthcare. And as Nicole pointed out, our tax dollars are already going to people who are not covered. I saw that quite often, especially working in the criminal justice system. We had a lot of folks who went without insurance for a variety of reasons, and taxpayer dollars were still going to cover their urgency and emergency room care. We should not be lurching from extreme emergency to keep people covered. We need people with comprehensive insurance so that they can get the preventative care options that we need to sustain a healthy society going forward. So I am a huge supporter of the single-payer healthcare program. I think the ACA was a good start, but too many people are falling through the cracks of the ACA, meaning that they don't make enough to qualify for subsidies that would cover their premiums, but they're also not making enough. They're making too much to qualify, but not making enough to pay for their premiums. I think of my friend Amy out in Brainerd, who's a single mom, and she has a good job, but she also has exorbitant daycare expenses, $100,000 in student loans, very high rent, and at the end of the day, she does not have enough money left over to pay her healthcare premiums. So she was able to get her children covered, but she herself had to go without healthcare for 5 years, and that is simply inexcusable in this country. So I will be fighting strong for a single-payer healthcare system in Congress. We have another question from Ben. Running for office is one of the biggest personal efforts someone can do to make a difference. That is very true, Ben. Thank you. I have 2 questions. How do we inspire more people to truly get involved on a local level versus being content to only participate in once a year? Absolutely. I completely think that that is a big issue. We need to make sure that we are going beyond once-a-year marches and protests, as Ben said. We need people working, volunteering. I am excited about what 2016 brought. Not that it brought the Trump administration, but that it brought an increased awareness amongst people who had maybe just been voters prior to this. Recently, Time magazine covered a series of women who had been just voters up until the election. And they have now galvanized to go from being just voters to running for office to helping other women run for office. And that is across the board, not just women. I talked to people who, for example, had been active in the DFL in the 60s and 70s, but they felt that the DFL no longer stands strong for our progressive values, and they've gotten away from it. They haven't caucused in years. They haven't gone to a convention in years. So what I'm really excited about is my campaign is bringing those folks back into the fold. They know they can no longer afford to sit this out, and they're fighting for a candidate that they believe stands strong for the progressive values that they want to see reflected in our government. So I think, Ben, that we need to be reaching out to all those groups. There's this talk about, well, we need to bring more young people in, more millennials, and I completely agree. And my campaign is working to do that through social media, through going to colleges, through meet and greets that are kind of built around the schedule, the time schedules that young people have. But also we can't forget about the frustrated baby boomers, frustrated folks of the greatest generation, the frustrated Gen Xers who haven't been turning out either. So I'm very excited that my campaign covers a broad spectrum of age groups, as well as we have a lot of LGBTQ folks on our team, a lot of women. We have a lot of Native American voices on our team. So I'm excited that my campaign can be a blueprint for how we can involve all these groups going forward. And Glow asked, how do we address issues like the wage gap for women and minorities? Speaking of getting women and minority populations more involved. Thank you, Glow, for that question. One of the things that we have to engage in is transparency and equal representation. Equal representation, not just in our elected offices, making sure that our elected officials are surrounding themselves with voices from our minority populations, our Native American populations, and women. Ask your representative, how many people on his or her team are representative of these populations? Who has their ear? I'm very excited that my committee of campaign co-chairs, that you can also find on the website, is a wonderfully diverse list of all these groups that we've spoken about. And they have my ear. They have my direct number. They have meetings with me all the time, and we are constantly staying up to date on all the issues that affect all these groups. It's impossible for one person to constantly be plugged into everything that's happening, so I'm so lucky and fortunate to have this great group of people that are always keeping me up to date on what's happening in these areas. Addressing the wage gap specifically, transparency. We need to make sure that companies are being required to let their employees know how much people are making across the board, how much men and women in the same position are making. Because women can't go in and ask for a salary, demand a salary, if they don't know what their male counterparts in that industry are making. So those are a couple of steps that we can start going down to decrease the wage gap that women and minorities experience. Yes, for transparency. Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, that is a huge issue that I also heard about this summer, is too many people feeling like they don't understand where decisions are being made, how decisions are being made, all these closed door conversations, all these groups of men making decisions on women's healthcare choices. We need equal representation and transparency as two giant steps towards fixing a lot of the disparities that we're experiencing. We have another question here that asks about the government shutdown. Can you please tell me your experience with the government shutdown and what you think of the current situation? This is something that hits very close to home for me. I was furloughed in 2013 as a government employee, and it was an incredibly stressful time. It was 2013, and I had been so excited to apply for a mortgage. I had been renting, and I was ready to buy my first house. I had submitted a mortgage application for a home that I was in love with, and then I was laid off. And I had no idea when I would be going back to work, so I had to retract my mortgage application, and I lost the house. And that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the atrocities that are going to happen while the government is shut down. I just found out yesterday, and I might get a little emotional talking about this, but there's a young boy in Duluth, Minnesota, who is on the Make-A-Wish list, and his wish is to go to NASA and to visit the Smithsonian museums in DC. But because the government is shut down, this 10-year-old boy who is on the Make-A-Wish list will not be able to visit NASA or go to the Smithsonian museums. We have 800,000 employees like myself who will be furloughed, who will not be going to work on Monday if we don't resolve this. We have 2 million employees who will be going to work with no idea if they will be getting paid. We have critical services like the CDC and research laboratories that are going to go without funding, going to go without the time and energy commitment that we need to be constantly looking at a lot of these issues. So the government shutdown is one of the worst indications of the path that our country is on. I would like to see both sides of the aisle work together to get this resolved as soon as possible. I don't believe that we should be exercising the nuclear option, as President Trump suggested in a tweet this morning or yesterday. We absolutely should not be engaging in the nuclear option. If Senate Republicans cannot work out a compromise with Senate Democrats to reach a 60-vote threshold, then we should not be exercising that option, because we have a very, very small group in Congress that then are going to control the entire budget. So I want you to call your Congress members in the House, especially in the Senate, as we're discussing this, to move forward, to insist that they find a compromise on DACA, on CHIP, on these fundamental funding mechanisms that we need to keep our country running. So, not to get too long on the government shutdown, but I'm happy to talk with anyone about it at any time, because I have a lot of strong feelings about what happens when our government is unable to fulfill their most basic obligations. Let's see here. We've got a couple of questions that I think I'm missing, so Jason is going to be sending them over to me here we've got the evidence-based legislation. Oh, Nicole, wonderful. Okay, evidence-based legislation. I think that evidence-based legislation across the board is something that is missing in so many areas. And one of the areas that I can talk about right now is looking at a lot of the resource extraction projects that Minnesota is looking at starting. We have a evidence-based legislation, such as the Prove It First legislation that we've seen in other states. We have the U.S. Forest Service study that is underway right now that the Trump administration is actively working to stop, that our own congressman has actively worked to prematurely end by eliminating the funding for the study. He paired with Congressman Tom Emmer to try to end this study. When Democrats try to eradicate evidence-based studies, science-based decisions, what are we doing? We are the only party that happens to stand for facts and evidence and science right now. So we must insist that our Democratic legislators hold fast to those values. And one of the things that we are rolling out in our Clean Energy Plan and Economic Development Plan is how we can expand those studies, how we can expand public input into these processes. Because the public is full of experts in both economy, environmental regulations, in a lot of different areas, that they need time to go through these 1,000-page EISs, environmental impact statements, and we have ample experts in our public that need to be weighing in on that. So I would like to make sure we are giving the public ample time to comment on these projects and making sure that we are allowing science-based studies to continue in every area. What else we've got here? Oh, wonderful. How are you different than Rick Nolan? I love this question. We also have on the website, we have a site, a page that is called Why Leah, or what sets Leah apart, I believe is what it's called. And what sets Leah apart is a one-page document, more or less, that we can also send to you via email. Some people have asked they want a copy to carry around with them when they talk to their DFL chapters and their friends. And it goes through the 6 different areas that I am very different from Congressman Nolan in. I talk about some of the environmental policies that he's been really weak on lately, to put it mildly. I also talk about national security and how he has voted to extend, we'll say background investigations, but honestly, we're not extending additional background investigations on Iraqi and Syria refugees. What we're extending is a further layer of security that they then have to go through that the rest of refugees don't. That's called the SAFE Act, and it was voted on by Congressman Nolan in 2015 and passed the House. And what it does is it shirks our our humanitarian obligations, and it further convolutes our national security process, and it prevents good people who are trying to flee a horrific situation in Iraq and Syria from coming into the country in a timely fashion. This process already takes years. I know, I worked in the refugee screening process. We do not need to be adding additional layers of protection onto these areas that are already have ample screening procedures. So these are just a couple of examples that I give from the website page, where we outlay a lot of different votes that Rick has taken over the past 6 years, and where I would have voted differently, because I believe that our values should be focused on human rights, environmental protections, and economic justice. So those are a couple of areas where I am different from Congressman Nolan. I also believe that one big area that we need to focus on is electability. And over the past 3 cycles, we've seen Congressman Nolan go from winning elections by, I believe, 8% in 2012 to 1.5% the next cycle, to 0.5 percentage point last year. If we continue on that track, we will lose this seat in November. We also need to look at Amy Klobuchar outpaced Congressman Nolan in the 8th district by 40,000 votes. Those are 40,000 Democrats or potential Democrats that voted for Amy that didn't vote for Rick. So we need to make sure we're appealing to those folks, asking why they can't bring themselves to vote for a Democrat on the House ticket, and what we can do to earn their support and to get them voting Democrat down the ballot. So there are a lot of electability issues, not to mention the third-party candidate we have running, the GOP candidate who has a strong law enforcement background. We need a DFL candidate who can go toe-to-toe with Pete Stauber on those law enforcement issues and not allow the Republican Party to have the monopoly on national security and law enforcement, because they are the ones that are giving us travel bans and border walls, when the Democrats are the ones that know what national security really stands for: food and housing security, equal access to education and healthcare. That's what really keeps us safe. So those are a couple of areas that I differ from Rickon, and you can find on the website the What Sets Leah Apart page as well if you'd like to go through in more depth some of the votes and some of the differences. But I really I'm so happy that all of you joined us today, and I'll see if I've got one more question here before we wrap up in just about 5 minutes. We have got a question about how are you running your campaign? I get this question a lot. How am I finding money? What sort of campaign am I running? And we'll be releasing our first quarter filing very soon here. And what you'll see is that we raised about a quarter as much funding as Rick Nolan did. But what we've done with a quarter of the amount of funding that he did is stretch it so much further. We're running a really smart, effective campaign. We have 3 paid staffers, our campaign manager, our communications director, and our finance director, all phenomenal women who have been doing so much to help further this campaign. And then we have a team of volunteers, of precinct captains, of field directors, all volunteer across the district, from Isanti to International Falls, Bemidji, Brainerd, Grand Marais, all across. And if you visit the Facebook page, you'll see that we have phone banks going up and down across the district, and I invite you to join those phone banks because we need to get a strong turnout on February 6th for precinct caucuses, and phone calling is one of the best ways that we can reach people who have caucused before and might not be aware of my campaigns. So I appreciate all the phone bankers who are doing such great work. So we really are a grassroots campaign. We don't have the sort of money that the incumbent has or that a lot of big name Democrats and candidates have. What we have is a smart, effective campaign that is relying on social media, on phone calls, on volunteers to make sure that we're spreading the word in the most economical way possible. So with that, I got one more question. How excited are you for the Vikings game today? I am very excited for the Vikings game. I didn't wear my purple today because it's in the wash from when I was screaming in Little Falls for the Vikings game last week. I will be watching the game in Cambridge with my family and our really good family friends. I'm very excited, but no matter what happens, today I will hold on to last week and the Minneapolis Miracle, and I will replay that over and over again in my head because the Vikings made us proud. And at this time when we have so much going wrong on so many levels, I think it's okay to be a little excited about how well the Vikes have been doing, even though as a Minnesota sports fan, I know if we get excited, it can sometimes turn into disappointment, especially this far down the line. So I will be watching the game. I hope you will be watching the game. If you're in the East Central area of Minnesota, I am headed to Bram this afternoon. We will be at the Park Cafe in Bram, Minnesota from 2 to 4 o'clock today, and I will be meeting with folks in person, sharing literature, sharing ideas, listening, and talking about how we can build a stronger future for Minnesota's 8th district. So as we sign off today, I just want to remind people, if you would like to support the campaign, there are 3 great things you can do. You can caucus on February 6th, and not just you, but bring your friends, your family, your neighbors. On the website, if you don't know where you're caucusing, we have a caucus page where you can locate your county, your city, your precinct level, and find out exactly where you caucus in your area. So please caucus on February 6th. Please support the campaign with your financial support if you can. We have on the top of the website a link to our Act Blue page for donations, and we can always use financial donations to help me travel the state and meet with enough people to secure the endorsement on April 14th. And then third, just spread the word. Even if you're planning on caucusing already, please spread the word to everyone in your social circle. Share the page on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, word of mouth. Talk to folks. If you're watching the game today with them, ask if they've heard of Leah Phifer for Congress. And please just keep telling everyone you can, because this is truly a grassroots campaign and we rely on folks like you to help spread the word about it. So with that, I will probably sign off here. We're reaching about our 30-minute limit, and I want to thank everyone for joining today. Thank you for all your questions, and don't forget, if I missed anything or if you have questions that occurred to you later on, please email info@phiferforcongress.com. It's in the description on the Facebook video, and I am happy to dive into any questions, issues, comments, thoughts that you have. Thank you so much for joining today, and look for another Facebook Live Q&A happening next week. Thank you. Talk to you soon.